Hi, everyone. I hope you had a chance to go through the syllabus and watch the video about the syllabus in terms of what's going on in our class, our assignments, due dates, accessing the materials on D2L. So if you hadn't had a chance to do that, please do so. And what we'll do today is turn the corner and get into some content in terms of introducing you to what theory is. I imagine a lot of you are taking your first theory class now, although some of you may have had theory classes in other disciplines. But nevertheless, I approach the class as it is your first theory class. So we're kind of starting from scratch, and today's class will be an introduction to theory, giving you some definitions, some ways to think about it, and then kind of breaking down how we'll go about theory and discussing it during the semester. So, introducing you to theory, what I like to think of are a few different metaphors that we can use. So, instead of providing you some standard textbook definitions, which I say in the PowerPoint really doesn't tell us too much, what I do is provide you different ways of thinking about theory in terms of three different metaphors. So, the first way to think about theory is as a lens. So, kind of a way of seeing the world in a new way. So we take a theory, we take this lens, and we look at social life that we maybe see on a daily basis. But what we do is we see life in a new way when we use theory as a lens through which to look at the social world. And we'll come back to this metaphor as a lens throughout the semester. So another way to think about theory is as a tool. So, as a tool, we're looking at theory gives us a new way to understand the social world. It's not only to see it in a new way, but to kind of understand it more critically. And so, you really get the sociological insight into why things are happening, rather than this natural, or rather, it just kind of happens that way. We understand kind of the reasons behind what's going on, socially speaking, the reasons behind what's going on, perhaps psychologically speaking. So, the first way to think about theory, it's a lens. It gives us a new way to see the world. The second way to think about it, it provides us a new way of understanding the social world, theory as a tool. And so, the final metaphor that we'll use is a theory as a river. And as a river, basically, what we're looking at is how theory evolves over time. So, as I mentioned in our last class lecture, and when I went over the syllabus, the way we approach this class is historically, starting back with classical theory and then working our way to the end of the semester and looking at more contemporary, more current ideas. And so the river metaphor basically is like, we start up here with the classical ideas, and then we work our way down to the middle years, and then we work our way down to the contemporary, more recent ideas. And they all are interconnected. And that's where the river metaphor comes into play. It starts up here and it kind of breaks out into different directions. And then you have kind of these ideas evolving throughout time. And so we'll kind of keep that in mind, how the classical theory will influence the middle years and the more contemporary thoughts, how ideas kind of evolve, uh, similar to how rivers evolve as well. So that's how we can think about theory in terms of a lens, a tool, and as a river. And so I want to spend a few minutes here talking about how we'll examine theory. And kind of the first thing that we need to recognize when we start to read theory is that each theory will have its own theme. And so by theme, we want to highlight exactly, what type of theory, generally speaking, we're looking at. And so the different themes we're going to see throughout the semester, as I have in the PowerPoint here, we'll look at social change, we'll look at social control. So the first reading you have in terms of a theoretical reading is our next class. So we look at Machiavelli's The Prince. And The Prince is a theory of social control. So it helps us kind of understand exactly what he's trying to say, what he's getting at, by recognizing first and foremost, we're looking at a theory of social control. So social change, social control, social order, self-change, self-development, social stratification, dot, dot, dot. So these are different types of theory, different themes of theory that we'll be looking at throughout the semester. And so if you look at the PowerPoint, when we say social change, we're looking at a theory that's trying to explain how social life evolves. If we look at a theory of control, how do authority figures control the people under them? Self-change, how does one's identity change? And so again, we're going to look at these things all sociologically, looking at the social forces involved that promote change on the social level and that promote change on the individual level. So that's kind of one way to think about theory in terms of how we examine it. We need to recognize what type of theory we're looking at, the theme under examination. So in addition to recognizing the theme of a theory, context is also important. And the Gardner book that we have does a good job of kind of filling us in on both the theme and the context of a theory. And that's one reason I like to assign this book, is because she does a really good job at kind of understanding the background into the readings. So, make sure that you're reading Gardner's introduction to the actual theories before you actually read the theories, because it gives you the theme, what we're looking at generally speaking in terms of control or change. And then also she does a good job of kind of filling in the context. And the context is twofold. On the one hand, we have kind of the historical context, the time period in which somebody is living, in which somebody is writing. So depending on, when you're alive, that will have a say in terms of, what you're seeing, what you're going to perhaps be writing about. So for instance, when we get to our first classical theorists, Marx and Engels, they are really focused on capitalism. So in every theory we're going to see, they talk about capitalism, capitalism, capitalism. And they're fascinated by it because it was something new. It was a new way to organize social life. And because it was a new way to organize social life, they were trying to understand it, kind of see how it works and the consequences of that new social system on social life as a whole. And today, as I say, if you're looking at developing theories, a lot of people may be interested in social movements because, currently social movements are on the forefront of society in terms of, various movements, whether it be Black Lives Matters, whether it be, reopening our economy. And so kind of recognizing these things, people be more likely to think and write about them compared to, let's say a year ago, where a lot of these social movements were not on the forefront of society, or perhaps they did not even exist. So we'll kind of understand the history, because that's important to recognize, why they are writing about what they're writing about, but also context in terms of one's biography, uh, one's kind of personal life, and how one's personal life ties into what they're writing about. So, for example, we're going to be reading W.E.B. Du Bois later on this semester. And Du Bois is the first person to write about race as a social issue. And he never really got race as a social issue because the people writing the theories, for the most part, the persons who were publishing, the persons who were holding positions in academia, they were basically all white males. And being a white male in society, for you personally, race doesn't operate as a social issue. So it's not surprising that the first time we see race as a social issue, it's coming from the mind of an African American theorist, because race was an issue for him, being African American in a heavily segregated society. So one's life story can influence also kind of what they're interested in, what they're writing about. So now we'll turn our attention to how we're going to be examining theory in terms of how we're going to be thinking about it and how we're going to be writing about it as well throughout the semester. So when looking at the reaction papers that you'll be completing throughout the semester, basically I organize them in a way that I ask you to discover the what, the how, and we'll also discuss the why. And so when we say the what, basically you're trying to capture what the theorist is trying to explain. And so this is where, the theme is important. So for example, I'll jump ahead a little bit, but when we get to Machiavelli, the Prince, recognizing the theme, that's a theory of social control, we can begin to recognize kind of the what. What Machiavelli is trying to explain. He's trying to explain how the powers that be control society members. And then when we get into the how, we look at how he's explaining it. So he explains control by looking at various aspects, various techniques of control. And we'll break Machiavelli to Prince down in this format, specifically in our next class, in our next lecture. So when we think about theory, we can look at it in terms of the what the theorist is trying to explain. Because if we don't know what the theorist is trying to explain, then we probably are not going to understand the theory as a whole. So the what is important, and then also kind of recognizing the how is significant. So how is the theorist actually explaining it? And we'll get into that aspects as well, during our lectures, but also that's basically how I organize a lot of the questions in your reaction papers. And so finally, the why part. The why part is the most difficult part to find sometimes, but it's also maybe the most important part in terms of, what's the main kind of motivating factor? Why is it the way that the theorist thinks it is? And we can always find kind of one key driving force in the theoretical framework. And that key driving force that makes it the way it is what we call the why. So the what, what theorist is trying to explain, the how the theorist is explaining it, and the why, why is it this way compared to maybe being an alternative way. And again, this all seems maybe a little bit abstract now, but as soon as we start to apply it to different readings throughout the semester, this will make more sense. And so here's one quick illustration for you. And I'll look at Robert Merton's theory of crime. Merton's an American sociologist, and one of his popular theories has to do with crime and deviance. And so basically, we can say that it's a theory of social change in terms of its theme, because Merton's trying to explain change, specifically change of crime rates. So we can say that it's a theory of social change, and specifically the what he's trying to explain is he's trying to explain changing crime rates, why crime rates fluctuate, why they go up, why they go down, perhaps why they stay the same. So that's the what. He's trying to explain changing crime rates. And the how he explains it, he basically looks at, when the economy is strong, when there are a lot of opportunities for legitimate employment, to make a living, to make ends meet legitimately within the law, then crime rates are going to be relatively low. And then on the other hand, when the economy changes and a lot of those opportunities for legitimate work disappear, and then more people are going to step outside the law to still, do what we have to do in terms of making ends meet, in terms of making a living. So currently going on right now, we do see that kind of downturn in the economy. And with this downturn in the economy, we are seeing kind of increases in crime in different spots. And so you can say this generally speaking, on a nationwide basis, but also locally as well. If you have a strong local economy, then what you're going to see are lower crime rates as a result. But in a different part of the United States where the local economy is not so strong, then what you should see again, relatively higher crime rates in comparison. So, he's trying to explain why crime rates fluctuate, and he explains it by the how, by looking at how when the economy is strong, people find legitimate means of making a living. But when the economy is weak, then people have to turn outside of the law to sometimes make a living, to make ends meet. And so that's kind of the general ideas of it. But we can get into the nitty gritty too and recognize other reasons. When people experience a down economy, when you get laid off, often people will turn to substances, and sometimes the substances will turn to addictions, and with addictions will be more likely to commit crimes. So again, it's a byproduct of the down economy, but there's kind of other layers that we could dissect as well. So getting into the why. So why is it this way? For Merton here, it's not bad people or good people living at certain time periods or living in certain places. Rather, it's the larger social structures involved, specifically the economy and what type of jobs are available. And that's that driving force in its theory. When the economy is one way, crime is going to be one way. And when the economy is another way, crime is going to be another way. Breaking down the social change theory in terms of the what, the how, and the why. So again, that's how I'll be breaking down the majority of the readings, specifically the readings in the Gardner book here. And in addition to breaking it down in terms of the what, how, and why, we'll look at theory in terms of what we call kind of the main components of a theory itself, kind of breaking the theory down, not only in terms of how we see the world in a new way, how we think about it in a new way. Going back to those metaphors, Merton, his theory of crime allows us to see things in a new way. It's just not, again, bad people doing things or good people not doing things. We see how there are larger forces involved. We understand it more critically by recognizing the link between the economy, work, and crime. And so that's kind of those two different metaphors that we started out the semester with, the lens and also the tool. But here, what we'll do specifically when we get into our book reports, but also we'll be doing it throughout the semester at the same time, I ask you to look at theory in a different way. And here we look at the social construction of reality. And by this, the question we ask is, what is the driving force behind reality? What is that driving force behind social life in the framework? And here, it kind of ties back into what we just talked about in terms of the why. These two are very similar in terms of a driving force within the theory, within the framework that you're looking at. And then in addition to the social construction of reality, we'll be looking at the dynamic of structure and agency. So when we talk about structure, we're looking at social forces that are larger than the individual. And here we're looking at forces such as culture. We're looking at forces such as different social institutions, such as the economy, such as education, medicine, the law. And then when we talk about social structures, we're seeing how those things shape life, how these structures shape kind of how life is lived, how they shape what people do. And then when we look at agency, we're looking kind of at the other side of the coin. And when we look at agency, we're looking at actions of free will. So not how those larger forces are shaping us, but how we shape life through our decision-making, through our free will. And so it is a quick example, and I'll get to other examples too, but a quick one I always talk about in class is graduating on time. So that's kind of the social reality we're looking at is, our students graduating when they want to graduate in a timely manner. So on the one hand, you have agency to do so. You have to pass your classes. You have to sign up for the proper classes at the proper times. You have to take the classes you need to take. So you're practicing free will. You're practicing agency by, passing your classes, signing up for the proper classes you need to take, so on and so on. But also there's structural forces involved. In other words, if we don't offer the courses that you need, such as theory to get your major degree, then you may be doing what you need to do, but you have a structural force involved that's holding you back. And if we're not providing students enough opportunities to take the you know P and D classes, then you're not going to be able to graduate on time because those are requirements to graduate. So those are kind of the structural forces involved, where you can do what you have to do, but if we don't provide you the proper classes that you need to take to graduate, then there's nothing much you can do. So I kind of think about this in terms of another metaphor. We can think about structure as kind of the hand you're dealt. So in terms of playing cards, so structure, social structures represent the hand that you're dealt in life. But so we say that you can't really dictate, you don't have any say in the hand that you're dealt, but you do have the ability, you do have the agency, free will to play the hand in your own way. So structures are those larger forces that kind of shape what we do, the hand that we're dealt in life. Agency represents playing the hand, the free will to kind of do what we can do with our life. So in theory, we kind of look at this dynamic between the two. What are the social structures producing action in life? What are our agency elements producing action in life? So here's another illustration you can look at is legalization of marijuana. You can look at, kind of the social construction of reality. What's that main driving force? And a lot of people would point to economic reasons. So the social institution of the economy being that driving force. People are looking to create money. People were looking to create tax revenue for a certain state. And so money was the main idea. It wasn't about morality or something like that. It was more about economics. And so that could be the main driving force where we see the legalization of marijuana in different states and different communities. On the other hand, we could say, you could take a different approach to theory and say, no, it's more of a cultural change that drove it. People lessened, they minimized the stigma of marijuana, and that allowed people to see it as not a demon drug, but just a substance that people should be able to use if they choose to use it. And so you'll see this at the beginning of the semester. We'll look at two different theories of social change, both explaining how societies move forward, how societies evolve. But one perspective focuses on the economy as that driving force, but another perspective focusing on the same thing, how society moves forward, they focus on culture as a driving force. So getting back to legalization of marijuana, we can look at social structures involved, such as the economy. You want more money, you want tax revenue to be created. You could look at culture, kind of normalizing marijuana as something that's not a demon drug. But also, another institution that's important is the government. The government as a social structure, they have the last say in terms of what is legal, what is not. So we can't ignore the role of the government as a social institution, because nothing is going to be lawful unless they make it the law. And when you look at social structures, what we do is we take kind of a macro top-down approach, and that gets into the third way we'll be breaking down your book report. When we look at different directional focuses of theory, we either look at things from the top down, which we call the macro approach, or we look at things from the bottom up, what we call the micro approach. So the rule of thumb is when we focus on agency, so going back to legalization of marijuana, yes, you can look at the economy, less you can look at the government, but also we could focus on agency, where people had to go out there and protest. People had to be out there as activists for change. Otherwise, none of this would have happened. So you needed those people to go out there and campaign. You needed people to go out there and try to push legislation to legalize marijuana. And those are actions of free will. Those are illustrations of agency involved. And if we focus on those elements, we focus on that individual level, and we take a micro directional focus, trying to explain things from the bottom up. People got together, they wanted change, they fought for it, and kind of build up from there. You legalized it. Or on the other hand, we needed money. The economy is down, so we need to create more tax revenue. Top-down approach, explaining why we have legalized marijuana today. So again, this is a lot to take in, during the early parts of the semester. But this is basically a heads up in terms of what we'll be doing in terms of reading and discussing theory throughout the semester. So finally, to wrap up today's session, we can look at what we're doing next. So this is basically our introduction to what theory is, how we're going to be approaching it throughout the semester. And now we'll actually start to get into, in our next class, the readings themselves. So we'll take these readings and think about them and discuss them in the ways that we just went through. The what, how, and the why, structure and agency, macro, micro, directional focuses. And so the first one we're going to look at is The Prince by Machiavelli. And so when you're approaching this, again, look at the context involved in terms of history, the context involved in terms of the author, his biography, his life story, and you can see how those things influenced why he wrote The Prince. And we'll look at The Prince in terms of, what type of theory it is. As I mentioned before, we'll kind of theory of social change, we'll kind of a theory of social control, and then we'll kind of break it down as such. And some of you may have read this before in other classes, but nevertheless, we're going to be looking at it differently through that sociological lens. So I'll leave that here for today. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, get in touch, office hours, and I'll leave it there, and I'll see you next time.